Mr. Moretti, I think you should see this before she throws it away. The little girl's voice was quiet, but in the middle of the grand ballroom, it was the only sound that mattered. Every guest turned toward the 5-year-old standing near the edge of the room, holding a small piece of paper covered in crayon colors. Maya Johnson was not supposed to be there, not among the investors, family members, and powerful guests gathered beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Moretti estate. She was the daughter of Elena Johnson, one of the household staff. In a room filled with expensive suits, designer dresses, and people who were used to being heard, Maya was the person everyone expected to ignore. But she held the drawing with both hands as if it carried something important. Across the room, Victoria Bellini, Alessandro Moretti's fiancée, stopped smiling, only for a second. But it was enough for someone paying attention to notice. The guests saw a child with a drawing. Victoria saw something else. Maya, Victoria said gently, walking toward her with the same warm expression she used during charity events. That is a lovely picture, sweetheart, but this is not the time. Maya looked up at her. I need Mr. Moretti to see it. The room became quieter. Elena, standing near the service entrance, immediately stepped forward. Maya, honey, come back with me. Her voice was careful, almost afraid. She knew how quickly a mistake could cost someone their job. But Maya didn't move. She looked at Alessandro's empty chair at the head of the table, waiting for the man she believed needed to see what she had drawn. Victoria reached out her hand. Give it to me. I'll make sure he sees it later. Maya pulled the drawing slightly closer to her chest. No, he has to see it now. That small refusal changed the atmosphere. A few guests exchanged amused looks. They were not angry. They simply did not believe a child could understand what was happening around them. Victoria's smile remained perfectly in place. Maya, sometimes children think things are more important than they really are. She gently reached for the paper. This is just a drawing. But when Victoria saw the first corner of the picture, her fingers stopped. The smile disappeared from her face for less than a second. The drawing showed a room, a desk, a small black box, and on the desk was a watch with a tiny scratch across the face. A watch almost no one noticed because it was old and simple, but Victoria knew exactly what it was. Before Maya could say another word, Victoria took the drawing from her hand. That's enough. Her voice was still calm, but something underneath it had changed. She folded the paper once, then again, and before anyone understood why, she tore the drawing in half. The sound was small, almost nothing, but Maya's expression changed immediately. She didn't cry. She simply stared at the two pieces falling toward the marble floor. Please don't, Maya whispered. That's the only thing I saw. The guests became uncomfortable. Some looked away. Some pretended not to notice. Elena lowered her eyes because she knew this was not a room where someone like her could challenge people like Victoria. Then the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened. Alessandro Moretti walked inside. The man everyone in the room had been waiting for. 42 years old, wearing a black suit and the old family watch his father had given him. Alessandro stopped when he saw the scene in front of him. He did not see a child causing trouble. He saw a child kneeling down to collect pieces of something an adult had just destroyed. He saw Victoria holding half of a drawing. He saw every guest choosing silence. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Alessandro's eyes moved from the torn paper to Victoria. What happened? Victoria immediately stepped forward. Alessandro, it's nothing. She misunderstood something. It was only a child's drawing. He looked at Maya. Is that true? Maya slowly picked up one of the pieces from the floor. Her small fingers carefully brushed away the dust. Then she looked up at him. No, sir. Her voice was soft. It was what happened. Alessandro said nothing, because for the first time that evening he noticed something strange. Victoria was not embarrassed that she had torn a child's drawing. She was afraid that the child had drawn it in the first place. And lying on the marble floor between them was the only thing that could explain why. Alessandro Moretti did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The entire ballroom had already gone silent. He looked at the torn pieces of paper in Maya Johnson's small hands, then back at Victoria Bellini. A child's drawing, he said slowly, does not usually make someone this nervous. Victoria's expression returned to normal almost immediately. She gave a small smile, the kind people trusted because it looked calm and reasonable. Alessandro, you are reading too much into this. Maya is a sweet child, but she does not understand what she sees. She spends her days around adults, and sometimes children create stories from things they do not understand. Several guests nodded quietly. To them, Victoria sounded logical. She was elegant, educated, and part of Alessandro's world. Maya was a 5-year-old girl wearing a simple dress, standing near the people who served the food instead of the people who ate it. The difference between them was obvious. That was exactly why everyone expected Maya to be wrong. Elena Johnson stepped forward carefully. Mr. Moretti, I am sorry. I will take her back upstairs. Her voice carried the fear of someone who knew one wrong moment could change everything. But Alessandro lifted one hand, not to threaten, just to stop the room from moving too quickly. No one is taking her anywhere yet. Maya looked up at him. She did not look hopeful. She looked tired, as if she was already used to adults deciding what happened before hearing her. Alessandro noticed that. He noticed many things other people ignored. Maya, he said, lowering his voice, tell me what you drew. Victoria immediately answered before Maya could speak. Alessandro, honestly, this is unnecessary. That interruption was small, almost invisible, but it was the second time Victoria had tried to answer for Maya. Alessandro noticed. I asked her. The room became quiet again. Maya held the torn paper carefully. She looked at the missing pieces and then at Alessandro. I drew the room behind your office. A few guests exchanged looks. Victoria crossed her arms. There is no way she knows that room. Maya nodded slowly. I know because I saw it. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. She knew this was the moment where her daughter's honesty could create problems. But Maya continued. The man had a black box. He put something inside. Then he touched your watch. Alessandro's face did not change, but something inside his expression shifted. The watch. He looked down at the old family watch on his wrist. It was not expensive compared to the things around him. It was valuable because it belonged to his father. There was a small scratch near the edge that most people would never notice. Maya had drawn it. When did you see this? Alessandro asked. Last night, Maya answered. I was looking for my mom because she forgot her folder. Elena looked surprised. She had not known Maya had been there. You were near the office? Alessandro asked. Maya nodded. I did not go inside. I stayed outside because my mom said not to walk where I am not supposed to. That answer changed something. Maya was not claiming to have explored a place she should not have been. She was explaining exactly where she stood. Victoria stepped closer. Children misunderstand things. A shadow, a reflection, a person walking by. This is becoming unfair. Alessandro looked at her. Unfair to whom? Nobody answered. Victoria paused. Just for a moment. But that pause was enough. Alessandro walked toward the table where the broken pieces of the drawing had been placed. He picked up the smallest piece. On it was only a corner of the room. A line. A shape. Nothing meaningful to most people. But he recognized the location. It was the corner of his private office where the old family watch collection was kept. Maya, he said quietly. Why did you draw this? The little girl looked at the paper. Because I thought you should know. Why? Alessandro asked. Maya's answer was simple. Because everyone was acting like it was normal. The words stayed in the air. Everyone was acting like it was normal. Alessandro looked around the room. The guests. The staff. Victoria. He realized something uncomfortable. The problem was not only what Maya had seen. The problem was how many adults had learned to ignore what they did not want to face. He folded the small piece of paper and placed it carefully in his pocket. I want to see the rest of this drawing. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. Alessandro, surely you are not taking this seriously. He looked directly at her. I am taking seriously the fact that someone wanted it destroyed. And for the first time that evening, Victoria did not have an immediate answer. Because Alessandro was no longer looking at the drawing like a child's mistake. He was looking at it like the first piece of a puzzle. And somewhere inside that torn paper was a detail someone had worked very hard to erase. Alessandro Moretti did not leave the ballroom immediately after the guests began whispering. He stayed exactly where he was, standing beneath the warm lights of the chandelier, holding the smallest piece of Maya Johnson's torn drawing between his fingers. To everyone else, it was only a scrap of paper covered with a child's uneven lines. But Alessandro had spent his entire life learning one important lesson. The smallest details were often the ones that revealed the truth. He looked at the drawing again. The corner of the room, the shape of the desk, the old watch, the black box. None of it should have meant anything to a 5-year-old child. Yet every detail was placed with unusual accuracy. Victoria Bellini noticed where his eyes were focused. Alessandro, she said softly, you are letting a child's imagination create a problem that does not exist. Her tone was gentle, almost caring, the kind of voice that made people believe she was trying to protect everyone. Alessandro looked at her. Then you should have no problem proving that. Victoria's smile became slightly smaller. Proving what? That there is nothing to find. For the first time, Victoria did not answer immediately. It was only a moment, less than a second. But Alessandro noticed. He had built his entire empire by noticing the moments people tried to hide. Elena Johnson stood quietly near the wall, watching the exchange with fear. She knew Alessandro was powerful, but she also knew powerful people did not always want the truth. Sometimes they wanted peace more than they wanted answers. Mr. Moretti, Elena finally said, Maya does not mean to cause trouble. She just remembers things differently. Alessandro turned toward her. Did you know she was near my office? Elena lowered her eyes. No, sir. Did you know what she saw? No, sir. Alessandro looked back at Maya. The little girl was still holding the remaining pieces of the drawing. She was not looking at Victoria anymore. She was looking at him, waiting to see if he would do what every other adult had done. Decide before listening. Maya, Alessandro said. Come here. Elena immediately became tense. But Maya walked forward slowly. She did not run. She did not act brave. She simply walked because she had been asked. Alessandro placed the pieces of paper on the table between them. Show me what you remember. Maya carefully arranged the pieces together. Not perfectly. The paper had been torn. Some parts were missing. But she focused on what remained. This was the desk, she said. Her small finger moved over the drawing. This was the chair. This was the box. Alessandro leaned closer. How do you know it was a box? Maya looked confused by the question. Because it opened. The room became quiet again. Alessandro looked at Victoria. She did not move. Who opened it? He asked. Maya looked down. I do not know his name. That answer surprised him. You do not know? She shook her head. No, sir. I only heard his voice. Alessandro studied her carefully. A child trying to create a story would usually fill empty spaces. Maya did the opposite. She admitted what she did not know. That made the things she did know more important. What did you hear? He asked. Maya held the edge of the paper. He said that after tonight, everything would belong to them. A few guests looked uncomfortable. Victoria immediately stepped in. This is enough. Alessandro, you cannot seriously question every conversation because of a child's memory. Alessandro did not respond. Instead, he picked up the drawing and looked at the watch again. The old family watch had a small scratch near the side. A scratch created years ago when his father accidentally dropped it while repairing the strap. Almost nobody knew about it. Not employees, not guests, not even some members of the extended family. He looked at Maya. Why did you draw this part? Maya answered quietly. Because he touched it. Alessandro's expression changed. Not dramatically. Not enough for most people to notice. But Victoria noticed. She knew something had shifted. because Alessandro was no longer wondering whether Maya was telling the truth. He was wondering why someone had needed to stop her from telling it. "I want to see the room," Alessandro said. Victoria's eyes moved toward him. "Now?" "Yes." "During the party?" "Especially during the party." The guests became silent as Alessandro walked away from the table. Maya remained beside Elena, holding the torn drawing close. Victoria followed a few steps behind him, still calm, still composed. But inside the perfect image she had created, something had changed. Because the child she dismissed as invisible had just pointed Alessandro toward the one place Victoria hoped he would never look again. Alessandro Moretti walked through the silent hallway toward his private office, and for the first time that evening, nobody followed him because they were invited. They followed because they were afraid of what he might discover. The grand mansion that usually felt controlled and organized suddenly felt different. Every painting, every locked door, every quiet corner seemed to hold a question. Victoria walked beside him, maintaining the same calm expression she had worn all night. "Alessandro," she said softly, "I hope you realize how serious this is. A child's misunderstanding can damage people's reputations." He did not look at her. "Whose reputation are you worried about?" That question created a brief silence. Victoria recovered quickly. "Everyone's. Yours. Mine. This family's." Alessandro stopped outside his office door. He looked at the handle, then at the small piece of paper still in his hand. Maya's drawing showed this exact entrance. Not perfectly, not like a photograph, but enough. The position of the desk, the location of the cabinet, the shape of the doorway, details a child should not know unless she had actually seen them. He opened the door. The office was exactly as he had left it. The leather chair behind the desk, the shelves filled with family records, the display case holding items passed down through generations. Nothing appeared wrong. Victoria stepped inside behind him. "You see?" she said. Nothing happened. Alessandro did not answer. He walked slowly around the room, looking at things differently now. Not as the owner of the house, as someone searching for what others wanted him not to notice. He stopped near the desk. "Maya," he said, "come here for a moment." Elena looked nervous, but Maya walked in with her mother beside her. Alessandro placed the drawing pieces on the desk. "Show me where you were standing." Maya looked around carefully. She did not touch anything. She pointed toward the hallway outside the office. "There." Alessandro followed her finger. "You were there the whole time?" Maya nodded. "I was waiting for my mom. She told me not to go inside." That answer mattered. She was not claiming to have searched through his office. She was explaining that she stayed where she was allowed to be. "What did you see?" Alessandro asked. Maya looked at the desk. The man opened the black box. She pointed toward a cabinet. Then he took something out. Alessandro looked at the cabinet. It was locked. Victoria immediately spoke. "This is becoming ridiculous. Are we really going to inspect every object in this room because a child drew a picture?" Alessandro turned toward her. "No. We are going to inspect this room because you were afraid of the picture." Victoria's expression hardened for the smallest moment. Then she smiled again. "I was trying to protect the evening." Alessandro noticed the wording. Protect. Not deny. Not explain. Protect. He moved toward the cabinet and checked the lock. It was still closed. The room remained silent. If Maya was wrong, there was nothing to find. But if she was right, the truth had been hidden in plain sight. Alessandro looked back at her. "Maya, what color was the box?" "Black." "How big?" She held her hands apart carefully. "About this big." She paused. "Like a lunchbox, but not for food." Alessandro looked at the cabinet again. Inside were several family documents and personal items. But there was one empty space on the shelf that he had never noticed before. A rectangular mark in the dust. Something had been sitting there for a long time. Something had recently been removed. Victoria saw him notice it. Her face stayed calm, but her hand tightened around the edge of her jacket. It was the first physical sign that something was wrong. Alessandro did not open the cabinet. Not yet. He had learned that rushing toward the truth often made people hide it better. Instead, he closed the cabinet door and turned back to the room. "Thank you, Maya." The little girl nodded. "I just wanted you to know." Those words stayed with him. Not because they were dramatic, because they were simple. Maya was not trying to win. She was not trying to punish anyone. She was trying to make sure the truth was not erased. Alessandro walked back into the hallway, leaving Victoria behind for a moment. He pulled out his phone and sent one message to his security director. "Check the office access records from last night. Do not alert anyone." Then he looked once more at the torn drawing in his hand. The missing pieces no longer felt like damage. They felt like the beginning of an answer. But somewhere inside the mansion, someone already knew Alessandro had started looking. And that person was about to make their next move. Alessandro Moretti had spent years building a world where information was controlled. Every contract, every conversation, every decision passed through layers of security and careful planning. But that night, the first real warning had not come from an employee, an advisor, or one of his closest associates. It had come from a 5-year-old girl holding a broken drawing. After leaving his office, Alessandro did not return to the party. He went somewhere quieter. A private security room beneath the east wing of the mansion, where every movement inside the property was recorded. The security director, Marcus Reed, was already waiting. "You received my message," Alessandro said. Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. I checked the office access records from last night." Alessandro looked at the screen. "And?" Marcus hesitated. That hesitation told Alessandro more than the answer itself. "Your office was accessed at 11:47 p.m. By who?" Alessandro asked. Marcus turned the monitor toward him. The access card belonged to Victoria Bellini. For a moment, Alessandro said nothing. The answer was exactly what Maya's drawing had suggested. But a suspicion was not proof. He had learned long ago that assumptions could destroy innocent people. "Show me the footage." Marcus opened the security archive. The hallway camera appeared on the screen. The image showed Victoria walking toward the office late at night. She was alone, calm, certain. Then, several minutes later, the footage skipped. A blank section appeared where the recording should have continued. Alessandro leaned closer. "Why is there a gap?" Marcus checked the system. "Someone removed that section manually. Can you recover it?" "I can try." Alessandro nodded. "Do it quietly." Before leaving the security room, he looked again at the timestamp. 11:47 p.m. The same time Maya said she saw someone near the office. The same time nobody else in the house was supposed to be there. Meanwhile, upstairs, Victoria sat in the ballroom surrounded by guests, still wearing the same perfect smile. To everyone else, she appeared composed. But inside, she knew something had changed. Alessandro had not dismissed the child. He had listened. That was the one mistake she had not expected. The next morning, Alessandro returned to his office before sunrise. The mansion was quiet. The party decorations remained untouched, but the feeling inside the house had changed. He opened the cabinet Maya had pointed to. Inside were family documents, old records, and personal items. Nothing seemed unusual until he looked closer. There was a clean rectangular mark in the dust. Something had been removed recently. Something had been stored there long enough to leave a shape behind. Alessandro called Marcus. The empty space in the cabinet. Find out what was there. A few hours later, Marcus returned with a report. There was a small security box registered in the family inventory. Alessandro looked up. A security box? Yes, it was listed as containing old property, documents, and private records. Where is it now? Marcus paused. The inventory says it was transferred 3 weeks ago. Alessandro looked at the transfer record. The authorization signature belonged to Victoria. The discovery did not prove everything, but it changed the question. It was no longer, was Maya mistaken? The question became, why was Victoria moving something from his office? Later that afternoon, Alessandro asked Maya to join him in the library with Elena present. He placed a blank piece of paper on the table. Maya, I want you to help me remember something. Maya looked at him carefully. Remember what? Everything you saw before the picture was torn. She held her small box of crayons but did not immediately draw. Will I get my mom in trouble? Elena looked surprised. Alessandro answered first. No. Telling the truth does not get people in trouble. Hiding the truth does. Maya slowly opened the box. She drew the hallway, then the office door, then the black box. But this time she added something she had not mentioned before. A small red mark on the corner of the box. Alessandro noticed immediately. What is that? Maya looked at the drawing. A sticker. What kind of sticker? She thought for a moment. A bird. Like a red bird. Alessandro froze. Not because of the sticker itself. Because the Moretti family security boxes had a small red bird emblem engraved on the corner. It was a symbol used only for private family records. Maya had no reason to know that. She had not been shown the symbol. She had drawn it because she had seen it. Alessandro looked at the new drawing, then at the old torn pieces he had kept. The two images matched. The details were connecting. But before he could ask another question, Marcus entered the library with a serious expression. Sir, we recovered part of the deleted camera footage. Alessandro turned. And Marcus placed a tablet on the table. You need to see this. The screen showed the hallway outside the office. The missing footage was only a few seconds long. But those few seconds changed everything. Victoria was not alone when she entered the office. Someone else had been waiting inside. Someone Alessandro recognized. And suddenly, the drawing was no longer just about what Maya saw. It was about who else had been trying to make sure nobody ever saw it. Alessandro Moretti stared at the recovered footage on the tablet, and for the first time in years, he felt something more dangerous than anger. He felt uncertainty. The screen showed the hallway outside his private office at 11:47 p.m. Victoria Bellini walked toward the door with a calm expression, exactly as the access records had shown. But this time, the missing seconds had been restored. The camera continued recording. A few moments later, another person stepped out from the shadows near the office entrance. Alessandro recognized him immediately. Richard Voss, a longtime business advisor who had worked with the Moretti family for almost a decade. A man who had attended family dinners, reviewed contracts, and stood beside Alessandro during important decisions. Marcus Reed watched Alessandro carefully. Sir, there is more. He tapped the screen and brought up another file. The security box transfer was not random. It was connected to a private ownership review. Alessandro looked at the documents. The small red bird emblem Maya had drawn appeared in the corner of the original file. That symbol was not just decoration. It represented the most sensitive family records. Information about properties, private agreements, and decisions that could affect control of the Moretti organization. Who requested access? Alessandro asked. Marcus answered quietly. Victoria Bellini and Richard Voss. The room became silent. Alessandro leaned back and looked at the tablet again. The image of Maya's drawing came back to his mind. A 5-year-old girl standing in a corner, watching adults move around her, remembering details nobody thought mattered. She did not know what she was looking at, Alessandro said. Marcus nodded. No, sir. But she saw enough. That sentence stayed with him. Enough. Maya did not uncover the truth because she was searching for it. She found it because nobody believed a child was paying attention. Later that afternoon, Alessandro met with his legal team in a private conference room. He did not tell them everything. He only shared verified facts. The access records, the missing camera footage, the unauthorized transfer, the names involved. Do not contact Victoria, Alessandro instructed. Do not warn Richard. If they believe we know, they will change their plan. His attorney looked surprised. You are allowing them to continue? Alessandro looked at the documents in front of him. No, I am allowing them to reveal the rest. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Victoria continued acting as if nothing had changed. She visited Elena's work area and spoke with the same polite tone she always used in front of others. "I hope Maya understands that adults have responsibilities," Victoria said. Elena stayed quiet. She knew those words were not really about responsibility. They were a reminder of the difference in power between them. But Maya was nearby, drawing at the kitchen table. She looked up and noticed something important. Victoria was not looking at her. She was looking at the small box of crayons beside her. The same box Maya had used when she created the original drawing. Later, when Alessandro reviewed the recovered footage again, he noticed something else. Before Victoria entered the office, Richard had placed a small envelope inside his jacket pocket. The camera angle did not show what was inside, but Maya's drawing showed something similar. A small rectangle next to the black box. Alessandro returned to the library and asked Maya one more question. "Maya, when you saw the black box, did you see anyone carrying anything else?" Maya thought carefully. She did not answer immediately. Then she pointed to her drawing. "This." She touched the small rectangle. "He had this. Do you know what it was?" Alessandro asked. Maya shook her head. "No. I only know he was worried about dropping it." Alessandro looked at the drawing. She was not describing an object. She was describing a behavior, another detail, another piece of truth. That was how Maya remembered the world. Not through complicated explanations. Through small things adults ignored. A nervous hand. A missing object. A door that opened when it should not have. Alessandro finally understood the bigger truth. The drawing was never the threat. The drawing was evidence of a much larger plan already moving around him. Victoria and Richard were not trying to hide one mistake. They were trying to change the future of the Moretti family. And they had underestimated the one person who saw the first step. A little girl who had no power, no influence, and no reason to lie. That evening, Alessandro stood alone in his office, looking at the place where the security box had been stored. He placed the torn drawing pieces beside the empty space in the cabinet. For years, he had believed control came from knowing everything. But now he realized something different. Sometimes the person who sees the truth first is the person everyone else has already decided not to listen to. And as Alessandro prepared his next move, he knew one thing. He could not simply expose Victoria. He had to uncover every person who believed they could erase the truth and walk away. For the first time in many years, Alessandro Moretti stopped trying to control the room and started watching it. He had spent his entire life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Respect, money, influence, protection. Everyone approached him with a reason. But Maya Johnson had walked into his world carrying nothing except a small drawing and a need for someone to believe her. That was why he trusted the next step carefully. Not emotionally. Not because he felt sorry for her. Because the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. The next morning, Alessandro returned to the mansion before sunrise. The house was quiet, but his security team was already working. On his desk were copies of the recovered footage, the access records, and the transfer documents connected to the missing security box. He studied every page before making a decision. He could not confront Victoria yet. A direct accusation would only give her time to protect herself and anyone connected to her. He needed the full picture. "Keep everything normal," Alessandro told Marcus Reed. "No one changes their routine. No one knows we are looking." Marcus nodded. "Even Victoria?" Alessandro looked toward the window overlooking the property. "Especially Victoria." Later that morning, Alessandro joined Victoria for breakfast in the mansion dining room. She appeared exactly as she always did. Calm, elegant, in control. "You seem quiet today," she said. Alessandro took a sip of coffee. "A lot happened last night." Victoria smiled softly. "Because of a child's drawing?" There it was again. The same dismissal. The same attempt to make the truth sound insignificant. Alessandro looked at her. Sometimes small things reveal large problems. Victoria placed her cup down carefully. "You are not seriously allowing a servant's child to influence how you see the people around you." Alessandro did not answer. Instead, he watched her reaction. The words were not anger. They were something more revealing. She was not worried about Maya being wrong. She was worried about Maya being right. Across the mansion, Maya sat with Elena in the kitchen. Elena was still nervous about everything that had happened. "Maya," she said gently, "you cannot put yourself in the middle of adult problems." Maya looked down at her crayons. "I was not trying to be in the middle." Elena touched her daughter's hand. "Then why did you draw it?" Maya looked at the small notebook beside her. "Because Mr. Moretti looked like everyone was telling him something different." That answer stayed with Elena. Maya did not understand power. She did not understand business. She only understood when someone was being left alone with a truth nobody wanted to hear. Later that afternoon, Alessandro asked Marcus for another update. "We found something else," Marcus said. He placed a folder on the desk. Inside was a series of messages between Richard Voss and several business partners. They were not direct admissions. They were careful conversations, meetings, timelines, questions about Alessandro's future decisions. Nothing illegal by itself, but together they showed coordination. They were preparing before the transfer request, Marcus explained. The security box was only one step. Alessandro looked through the pages. What was the next step? Marcus opened another document, a draft agreement. It was designed to give temporary control of several company decisions to a group of advisors if Alessandro became unavailable or unable to lead. Alessandro leaned back. The plan was not to destroy his reputation. It was to quietly remove his authority. The realization changed everything. This was not about one missing box. It was about replacing him while keeping the appearance of stability. That evening, Alessandro found Maya in the library drawing again. He did not ask her to investigate. He did not ask her to find anything else. He simply sat across from her. "What are you drawing now?" he asked. Maya looked at the page. "The house." "Why?" She shrugged. "Because houses remember things." Alessandro almost smiled. It was a simple answer, but it carried something he understood. Buildings remembered footsteps. Rooms remembered conversations. People just forgot to pay attention. Maya looked at him. "Are you still mad at me?" Alessandro paused. "Why would I be mad?" "Because everyone was upset when I told the truth." For a moment, Alessandro had no answer. Then he said quietly, "Sometimes people get upset when the truth arrives before they are ready." Maya nodded as if that made sense. And somehow, coming from a 5-year-old child, it did. Alessandro stood and walked back toward his office. He was no longer investigating because of a drawing. He was investigating because he had discovered a system built on silence. Before the night ended, Marcus delivered one final piece of information. The person who requested the original transfer of the security box had not been Victoria. It had been Richard Voss. Victoria had only approved it afterward. Alessandro looked at the document and understood the next move. Victoria was not the only person hiding something. She was protecting someone else. And now Alessandro knew exactly where to look next. The grand dining room of the Moretti estate had hosted countless important conversations. Business agreements, family decisions, private meetings between powerful people who believed they controlled every outcome. But on this evening, Alessandro Moretti chose the same room for a very different reason. He wanted everyone who had ignored the truth to hear it. The long table was filled with the people connected to the events of the past week. Victoria Bellini sat calmly on one side, dressed with the same elegance she had shown every time she wanted people to trust her. Richard Voss sat nearby, appearing confident but quieter than usual. Several family advisors were present. The same people who had watched Maya Johnson stand alone with a torn drawing were now waiting to see what Alessandro would say. Maya was not standing in the center of the room. She was sitting beside Elena, exactly where a child should be. Alessandro had made that decision himself. This was not going to be another moment where a child carried the weight of adults' mistakes. He stood at the head of the table with a folder in front of him. A week ago, a child brought something to this house that nobody wanted to see, he began. Nobody moved. Not because it was false. Because it was inconvenient. Victoria smiled slightly. Alessandro, I hope this is not about a drawing again. He looked at her. It is about what happened after the drawing. That sentence changed the room. Alessandro opened the folder. The first item was the security access report showing Victoria entering his office. The second was the recovered camera footage showing Richard Voss waiting nearby. The third was the transfer record connected to the missing family security box. The room became quieter with every document. Richard finally spoke. Those records do not prove wrongdoing. They only prove that we were reviewing family documents. Alessandro nodded. Correct. One piece of evidence rarely tells the whole story. He placed another document on the table. That is why we continued looking. The next file was the draft agreement designed to shift decision-making authority away from Alessandro. Several advisors looked at each other. They had not known the full plan. Victoria remained composed. You are misunderstanding a protective arrangement. We were trying to prepare for uncertainty. Alessandro looked at her. A protective arrangement requires trust. Secret transfers do not. Then he placed the final item on the table. Maya's restored drawing. The paper had been carefully repaired. The torn edges were still visible, but the picture was complete again. The room looked at it differently now. It was no longer a child's drawing. It was a timeline, a record of what Maya had seen. This was the first warning, Alessandro said. Not because she understood contracts or ownership. She did not. She simply remembered what she saw. Victoria looked toward Maya. A child's memory is not evidence. Alessandro answered immediately. By itself, no. But a child's memory supported by access records, camera footage, and documents is something different. That was the moment the balance of power changed. Victoria had spent years understanding how to control rooms like this. She knew how to make people question themselves. But now the room was not following her emotions. It was following facts. Alessandro turned toward the family advisors. Everyone here needs to understand something. The problem was not only the people who planned this. The problem was everyone who saw warning signs and decided silence was easier. The words landed heavily. The manager of the household looked down. The advisors avoided eye contact. Even the guests who had laughed when Maya's drawing was torn now looked uncomfortable. Elena held Maya's hand under the table. For the first time, she did not look afraid. She looked relieved. Victoria stood slowly. You are choosing the word of a servant's child over people who built this family with you? Alessandro's expression did not change. No. I am choosing evidence over status. Nobody in the room had an answer for that, because that was the truth Victoria had failed to understand. Her power came from convincing people that some voices mattered more than others. But Alessandro had finally seen what Maya had shown him from the beginning. The smallest person in the room was not the least important person in the room. As security officers waited outside to escort the legal team through the next steps, Alessandro walked toward Maya. He did not offer her money. He did not treat her like a symbol. He simply said, "You were brave enough to tell the truth when nobody wanted to hear it." Maya looked at him and asked, "Is the picture okay now?" Alessandro looked back at the repaired drawing. "Yes," he said, "and everyone can see it now." But as the room began to clear, Alessandro knew the most important part was still ahead. The truth had been revealed. Now he had to make sure the people who were hurt by the silence were not forgotten. 3 months after the night the truth finally came out, the Moretti estate felt different. Not because the mansion had changed. The marble floors were still polished. The large windows still looked over the same gardens. The rooms were still filled with expensive furniture and family history. But something important had changed inside the walls. People were listening. For years, the house had been built around power. The person with the highest position spoke the loudest. The people with the least influence learned to stay quiet. But everything changed the night a 5-year-old girl walked into a ballroom holding a broken drawing and refused to let the truth disappear. Victoria Bellini was no longer part of the Moretti family circle. The legal investigation had confirmed the evidence Alessandro presented. The unauthorized transfers, the hidden agreements, and the attempt to quietly change control of family decisions were no longer rumors. They were documented facts. Richard Voss also faced the consequences of his choices. The people who had trusted him now understood that loyalty was not proven by years of friendship or a professional title. It was proven by honesty when honesty was difficult. But for Alessandro Moretti, the most important change was not what happened to Victoria or Richard. It was what happened to the people who had been invisible for too long. A week after the investigation began, Alessandro called a meeting with every employee of the estate. Not executives, not investors, everyone, the kitchen staff, the maintenance workers, the household team. Elena Johnson stood quietly near the back of the room, unsure why she had been asked to attend. She had spent years believing people like her were supposed to stay unnoticed. Alessandro stood in front of them and spoke differently than he usually did. There was no cold authority in his voice, only honesty. This house has always protected its reputation, he said. But a house is not defined by its appearance. It is defined by how it treats the people inside it. He announced new protections for every employee. Clear contracts, fair schedules, a formal process for concerns to be heard without fear of losing their jobs. No one would be expected to remain silent simply because they had less power. Elena looked down, trying to process what she was hearing. For years, she had worked hard while worrying that one mistake could take away everything she had built for her daughter. Now, for the first time, she felt seen. Later that afternoon, Alessandro found Maya sitting in the library with her crayons spread across the table. She was drawing again, but this time the picture was different. It showed the entire house, the garden, the windows, the people who worked there. Alessandro smiled slightly. Another drawing? Maya nodded. A better one. He looked at the page. Why is this one better? Maya thought for a moment. Because nobody is missing. Those words stayed with him. Alessandro looked at the drawing and understood what she meant. The first picture had been about something people wanted to hide. This one was about everyone being seen. He picked up the repaired original drawing from the frame on the wall. The torn edges were still visible. He had chosen not to hide the damage because the damage was part of the story. Do you know why I kept this? He asked Maya. She looked at it carefully. Because it helped you? Alessandro shook his head. Because it reminded me to listen. Maya smiled. It was a small moment, but it represented everything that had changed. Alessandro Moretti had spent years believing power meant controlling every detail. Maya taught him that real strength was being willing to hear the smallest voice in the room. Before leaving, Maya looked at the framed picture and asked, "Are people going to believe children now?" Alessandro looked at her and answered honestly, "They should have believed them before." The mansion that once ignored a little girl's truth now displayed the very thing someone tried to erase. Not as decoration, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a reminder. Reminder that justice does not always arrive from the most powerful person in the room. Sometimes it arrives from the person everyone else decided was too small to matter. And that was the lesson Alessandro Moretti would never forget. The smallest voice had not changed because the world finally listened. The world had changed because one little girl refused to stop telling the truth.